Bitcoin will replace the dollar, says Twitter and Square founder Jack Dorsey in response to a tweet by rapper Cardi B, who broadly asked if crypto would replace the US dollar. Jack's response? Yes, Bitcoin will. Dorsey has expressed support for Bitcoin since at least 2018. In August, he tweeted that Bitcoin will unite a deeply divided country and eventually the world. By contrast, Dorsey throwing shade at Web3, tweeting, "You don't own Web3. The VCs and their LPs do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity with a different label. Know what you're getting into." And the pushback on Twitter was strong. Web3 investors and advocates defending their projects, but also some pointed criticism. Shapeshift founder Eric Voorhees tweeting, "Saying you don't own Web3 because VCs own some of it is like saying you don't control your Bitcoin because VCs also control some." Another user tweeting, "I wish I could vibe more with this, but you've taken a lot of VC money, so I don't know what you mean." Jack responding, "And this is why I know exactly what I mean." All right, joining us now to discuss is Mannik Dhillon, president of Victory Capital. Welcome, Mannik. So how do you like this new look for Jack, unbridled Bitcoin maximalist?
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? From social media empire to now cryptocurrency king, I guess, if you will. I think his comments, aren't off base, but, I think they also need context, right? With saying that Web3 is being controlled by venture capitalists may be true. Look at all the assets or all the investments that have made, I think $1 billion in the last quarter, $6 billion in the last quarter by VC firms into Web3 projects. You think back, though, to the internet in its early days, where would the capital come from? I mean, if we want to develop protocols, programs, today it's a lot about crypto trading platforms and games that are really what Web3 is today. It can be a lot more. Where's that capital going to come from? I mean, will the programmers, be able to work for free in a commune somewhere in a very socialistic manner? Or, they're going to need investment, just like internet companies did early on. And I think the comment that one of the Twitter responders made is just because they are a participant in a big way today doesn't mean that they are going to ultimately be in control of it either.
Right. So he's seriously giving Web3 some side eye. At the core, I feel Jack is basically saying that if the blockchain protocol you're building on doesn't have the security and decentralization that Bitcoin has, it's not good enough, which is why I said, this feels a lot like Bitcoin maximalism. Bitcoin is the one and only true coin or blockchain. And so it's a dig at Ethereum, Solana, Polkadot, and I would say all the other altcoins. But does his argument hold up that these other protocols are not sufficiently decentralized and are at the whims of VCs that back them?
Yeah, I think the thing that he's missed is that what exists today or how they're set up today doesn't mean that how they're going to exist in the future. It also, Bitcoin, if you think about it, and being a Bitcoin maximalist, I guess, is very narrow given all the different protocols and platforms that have developed. I mean, to say that Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar in a tweet without context for how, when, and why, is kind of far out of left field, right? But could it? Would it need to speed up in terms of transactions? What about what some of these other platforms like Ethereum have solved for in terms of transaction speed and are actually innovating the platforms with different iterations and versions as they come out? I just think it's too early to make a call, and to make a call can often disenfranchise those that want to be involved in improving it.
Right. I'll say this. We did have CoinDesk reporter Danny Nelson visit the Solana conference in Lisbon earlier this year. He wrote an article about it saying that it was slightly VC focused, and with network failures that Solana has been experiencing, Solana advocates have supported centralizing the network, which has raised some eyebrows. But on the other hand, can you argue that BTC dApps and layer 2s are custodial or centralized in their own way, and more so than DeFi sometimes?
Yeah, it is. So I think the pursuit for decentralization sometimes, it's noble, right? It's noble, and to say that is the best structure for everybody involved. But sometimes it is going to be those platforms, as you mentioned, that are a little more centralized, that maybe ultimately will have the infrastructure to be able to survive. At some point, we've seen decision making. Decision making has to be there. Community decision making can and does work. I mean, several blockchain protocols have proven that out. But I think it's one where we may be facing a future where it's not all or nothing in terms of centralization. And it may be something in terms of the blockchain that we have to come to terms with and make our decision, right? So again, this is where, like with anything in investing or any other aspect of life, due diligence will matter. And I don't think that all Web3 projects, I don't think all protocols will fall into one bucket or the other. And people just need to step back and spend time with a little bit of due diligence on their own to understand them. And I don't think we should paint everything with one brush either.
Jack also brings up another big point, which is Bitcoin will replace the US dollar. What are your thoughts on that?
It may be one day, like down the road, and this is where I said the context and the tweet was there in terms of timing. Quite possible that, we're looking down. You think about the inflation that we're staring down, the rising rates that we're staring down. Once you go from easing from a credit perspective, you have to usually ease from a devaluation or debasing perspective. And that's going to really be good for those crypto assets, I think, that have finite supply. And so in that case, you lose confidence in currency. Look at other countries around the world that have struggled with their currency and their values. It's making the case for Bitcoin. Now, could that potentially happen here? Maybe. But at the same time, I would ask, to be all in on just Bitcoin may not be the right solution. Because if we do see a world, let's say we hypothetically say we are facing a situation where Bitcoin overtakes the dollar in terms of adoption. Well, think about how quickly we transact in the dollar, how stable and not volatile in terms of its valuation the dollar is. Bitcoin would have to have some of those characteristics to supplant it, right? And today it probably doesn't, so it may be way off in the future. And I think some things in terms of speeds of transaction, volatility, those things would have to be addressed for it to do that. Otherwise, it's really easy to make a statement today where we don't know in the future.
Let's take a look at Bitcoin price right now. What's your outlook on BTC? What's behind this surge that we're seeing short term right now?
Yeah, I think, from what we've been talking about, we've been having a lot of conversations. We have a more diversified product out in the marketplace. We've had a lot of conversations with institutions, and they're seeing the opportunity. They're actually looking at pullbacks like we had recently as opportunities to invest. So I expect there's a little bit of that taking opportunity here. Bitcoin and other crypto assets have been linked with other risk assets in the pullback we've seen in the market. Now, maybe that's a correlation or a trend we might begin to see, but it also might be a function of how much leverage there was in the system and how much people are out there extending from a speculation perspective. And the fact that it hasn't really contracted more, and you see these days like today, maybe actually means that there's a little more institutional ownership coming back into play. And as we go forward into subsequent years, that's going to help the longer term holders, those that appreciate the value and the opportunity long term versus maybe more short term investors.
Earlier I talked about some indicators. Traders are moving coins onto exchanges. Google searches are down for BTC. That suggests Bitcoin could sink lower. Do you think this rally has legs or will it be short-lived?
I think there's still uncertainty. I think, honestly, there could be some movement down maybe in the near term, just because as people try to understand what is a rising rate, what is an inflationary environment going to mean. And with rising rates, more money and liquidity coming out of the market and further quantitative easing could pull some more of those speculators out of the market, those short-term holders, those that maybe were buying on with leverage. And so we could be looking at a situation where we experience some of that to the downside, but it really creates an opportunity for those that are looking at the asset class with a long-term lens. And I think there's a little bit of what's happening today in the last couple of days. And I think people should think about it that way. In any given asset class that's really volatile, like Bitcoin or any crypto asset, the opportunity to dollar cost average in is really attractive. And folks who have a long-term view should not look at these as signals of stress or deterrence, but actually look at it as opportunity.
Quickly, Mannik, we got to wrap, but price predictions for 2022.
I think it's not unexpected. It shouldn't be unreasonable to expect that we see some of the highs that Bitcoin reached this year, next year, as things settle out in terms of where rates are going, and people start to then really appreciate overall the crypto asset class and the ecosystem for what it presents into the future. And as you think about some of the more longer duration, more speculative growth equities that are going to be impacted maybe by a rising rate environment, there may be some assets being looked to put to work in diversifying ways like crypto assets. So it's possible that we see those highs again.